Well said. Okay, my name is Victoria Jimpson-Fludd. I'm the Executive Director of the African American Archive. We are the organization that are hosting this event today. I want to welcome all of you. Some of you might have come to some of our other events. If not, we are having an event on October 5th. Michael Duma will be at the Hudson Library talking about his new book, which is The Slow Death of Slavery in Dutch New York from 1700 to 1860. Brenda, would you like to say something about that talk? Because we're hosting it with them.
Yes, so it's going to be at the library. It's a hybrid program, Zoom and in person, but in person's always great. Michael will be selling his book, and thank you for bringing it to Hudson. It's going to be a wonderful program.
It will be a wonderful program. Okay, and without further ado, I will introduce Lisa Fludd-Smith, who is the Deputy Executive Director of our organization and also President of the Board, and she will moderate this program today. Lee?
Good afternoon, everyone. We're very excited that so many people are here. You know, you have that moment of like, oh my God, no one's going to show. And then we have a full house, so yay. I just want to, first of all, thank Matt and the library for hosting us and for being good supporters of our organization, because we could not do this without community involvement. And also to let you know that this program is being brought to you through a very generous grant from the Berkshire Taconic Foundation, and we just wanted to give a shout out to them for supporting this kind of cultural programming. Want to remind you all, please silence your cell phones so that we can enjoy this without interruption. We have with us a really fabulous panel of very knowledgeable and fun to be with, honestly, people who are going to be joining us today. The first, working from the end, Lavada Nahon is a historian of 17th through 19th century cultural and culinary practices focused on New York and the Hudson Valley, and she is an interpreter of African American history for the New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation Department. Next, we have Eileen Eichelberger, I said it right, okay. Who originally from Houston, Texas, Eileen spent the bulk of her career in the education of young women as Dean of Students and Director of Advancement and yoga instructor at an all-girls private high school. And after retiring, she moved to Hudson and fell in love with it. And she is now, since she is passionate about history and decorative arts and historical homes, she now currently volunteers at the History Room of the Hudson Area Library as an archivist, researcher, and co-curator of the History Room exhibits. And she also volunteers as a docent at Edgewater, which is a historic property stewarded by the Richard Hampton Jenrette Foundation in Barrytown, New York. Next to Elaine, we have Tom Shannon, who is the town historian of Germantown, and he's been in that position since 2019. One of the many projects that he's undertaken is a massive cemetery cleaning project of, I believe it's every gravestone in Germantown, right?
Almost there.
Okay.
Yeah,
and on that subject, Tom will actually be working with us as we are working this fall to clean the headstones of African American people in the Persons of Color Cemetery and the Dutch Reformed Church Cemetery. Tom also gathers the many historians of Columbia County for our quarterly lively roundtable meetings on history in the county. He is president of the New York chapter of Palatines to America and a trustee of the Friends of Historic Germantown. He has written about local and regional history for Hudson River Zeitgeist, the Columbia Paper, several municipal park kiosks, and other outlets. And he lives in Germantown with his wife and 4 children. And you can follow him at Germantown History on Instagram or the Germantown History Department on Facebook. I should mention that Heidi Hill was supposed to be with us today, and she unfortunately had a medical emergency. So Lavada is actually standing in for Heidi. So if you're looking on your sheet, you'll see that's why Heidi's not on there. Alrighty, and then we get to our interpreters. So, Karla Lynn and Jim Keyes are known as Karla and Keyes and are award-winning performing duo based in Yorktown Heights, New York, a little down south. And they bring history to life through dynamic storytelling and immersive interpretation. Together, they've written and produced acclaimed original programs, including This Man's a Spy, a musical retelling of Benedict Arnold's infamous betrayal, as well as Ona's Interview, the true story of George Washington's runaway slave, and Huldah, the Witch of the American Revolution, and Lise, Slave, Servant, and Spy. So 4 different programs that are all very interesting. Whether weaving together historical narratives, portraying real-life figures, or incorporating music on reproduction instruments, Karla and Keyes create engaging experiences that connect audiences to the past in powerful and unexpected ways. And last but not least, we have Drew Shuptar-Rayvis, also Pakatawas Makateu. Oh, yes, had to practice that. Drew holds a cum laude Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Sociology from Western Connecticut State University, and a certificate degree in archaeology from Norwalk Community College. A true American of the Mid-Atlantic region, his family includes indigenous Pocomoke heritage, Pennsylvania Dutch, Welsh, Swiss, English, Scots-Irish, Boyko-Ukrainian, and Ashkenazi Sephardic Ottoman Jewish, and he honors all of his ancestors as he is as a practicing living historian. He regularly participates in colonial reenactments and interpretations and other public educational events. He works diligently to research the preservation of the Eastern Woodlands languages, particularly Lenape, Southern Unami, and Nanticoke, and is educated in the many European languages at use in the colonial period. He's also the first garden manager at Western Connecticut State University Permaculture Garden, and he practices native horticulture. So you guys have a great panel here. So this painting that we're looking at is the Bergen Overmantel, and it represents a very specific farm in Greene County on the other side of the river, but it could just as easily be Kinderhook, right? If you were walking down the street, walking down Broad Street on a beautiful sunny Sunday like this, you would be seeing Native Americans and wealthy Dutch farmers and enslaved people every day all over. And so we jumped into, if you will imagine, we jumped into a time machine and brought these people right back here, right here to our modern day to tell us more about how they lived and how their experiences were in the Hudson Valley in the 18th century. And then we also have our lovely historians who are going to help us fill out that understanding and make connections that we can relate to in modern day. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine, who's going to tell us more about the painting that you're seeing.
Good afternoon. I am very happy to present to you some information about this painting you see projected up here. This overmantel painting dates to 1733 and is believed to be painted by John Heaton, an itinerant painter of British descent working in the Albany area in the first half of the 18th century. It was commissioned by Martin van Bergen, a prominent Dutch farmer in Leeds, New York, located in Greene County just across the river, to hang above the mantel of the fireplace in his farmhouse. And it is painted on 2 pieces of cherry wood. This overmantel is painted in a vernacular style, commonly thought of as folk art, and is considered a genre painting, as it depicts a scene from everyday life. Everything and everyone in the scene is shown with such realistic detail. It is a keen observation of daily life. Like most commissioned portraits of the 18th century, Overmantel paintings were often vanity pieces, commissioned by the sitter to tell the viewer about the life of that person. This overmantel is 7 feet long by 16 inches high, quite large for an overmantel, which speaks to the wealth and prominence of Martin Van Bergen and to his desire to document and show off that wealth, specifically his property and his possessions. No other type of art like this from this period is known to exist. The overmantel was discovered in 1954 by then Greene County historian Mabel Parker Smith. The original farmhouse built by Martin Van Bergen in 1729 was demolished in 1861, and a new home was built on part of the original foundation. The overmantel was saved and stored in the attic of the new home, which was eventually inherited by the new owner's grandsons, brothers Aubrey and Birgit Woolcott. The brothers never married and began selling off items in the home. No one bought the overmantel, but Mrs. Smith had seen it and remembered it years later when she was attending a seminar in Cooperstown, New York, given by the New York State Historical Association, where the folk art scholar Nina Fletcher Little was presenting a slideshow of various New England overmantel paintings in hopes that the attendees might know of similar objects in the area. She was curious as to why New York State had no folk art overmantels like the ones found all over New England. Overmantels were much more common in New England, as they were more of an English tradition rather than a Dutch one. Mrs. Smith realized that she had seen such an object at the Woolcott brothers' home. She contacted the director of the association, who came to Leeds to view the painting, eventually purchasing the overmantel for $100. It is now part of the permanent collection of the Fenimore Art Museum, and today is widely considered priceless. Why was this painting chosen for today's presentation? The Van Bergen overmantel shows us an entire social stratification of 18th century Dutch New York colonial life in one scene, and is considered the earliest known scene of its kind. It is the type of material culture that can provoke considerable discussion. So what do we see in this painting? We see the Catskill Mountains and thick forest background, making it one of the earliest landscape paintings of its time. We see a Dutch barn and thatch-roofed Dutch hay barracks. We see livestock of all kinds and birds flying overhead. We see a Dutch stone farmhouse, and together with the barn and the hay barracks, this provides documentation of early Dutch architecture, similar to that of the Van Hoosen Marriott House in Clavrock and the Lucas Van Allen House here in Kinderhook, all built during the same period. We see more livestock. We see horses prancing in a field. And we see people. We see Martin Van Bergen and his wife, Katrin, coming out of their house. We see their 7 children, 4 daughters, their 2 oldest daughters, Katrin and Nielcha, sitting on the lawn, and their youngest, Elizabeth and Anna Maria, walking away. We see their 2 sons, Petrus and Wilhelmus, riding horses, and the youngest son, Hendrik, has fallen off of his horse here. And we see Martin Van Bergen's brother, Gerrit Van Bergen, walking with his 2 sons right here. Van Bergen owned property next door. This is believed to have been their home, which is still standing today. I went and saw it yesterday, actually. We see two unnamed Native Americans, probably of the Munsee Lenape tribes of the Algonquin people, probably on the Van Bergen property trading with the Van Bergens. We see two unnamed indentured servants of German Palatine descent working on the farm. And we see two unnamed female enslaved women of African descent feeding animals. We see one unnamed enslaved man of African descent believed to be doing blacksmith work associated with this building here. And then right here, we see an elderly female enslaved woman of African descent named Angalo. She was given to Catherine Van Bergen as a wedding gift by her father, as identified in his 1705 will. The assembled components of the overmantel appear to create a narrative of abundance and rural tranquility. It seems everyone in the painting is going on about their day in a harmonious, cooperative, even content manner. But how peaceful was it? What were the underlying tensions that existed in this social stratosphere? What happens when we subvert this hierarchy? With a deconstruction and a closer look at this overmantel, we can begin to name the unnamed. We can acknowledge the presence and contributions of the many people who lived and worked not only in this overmantel painting scene, but also in the many farm scenes right here in Columbia County.
So I want to get started today by hearing from our guests from 1730 and letting them tell us what their experiences were living here. So Jim, we could start with you, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about what the life of a Dutch settler farmer would have been like.
My family has been here for generations. We acquired this land, we worked this land with the enslaved, with the Germans who've come here from the Queen's tar, Her Majesty's tar makers. But it's all divine. It's all providence. It is my faith that brings us all together. My faith that God has given us this land, these people, to work with, to trade with, and to have all this bounty. I oversee the rotation of the crops. I oversee the planting. I oversee the trading. I oversee the animals. But it's top down. The work is not done strictly by me, but under my authority.
Karla, do you want to tell us about the
Sure,
family?
sure. Am I talking from now or from then?
No, talk from then. Jim got us started doing it.
Okay. Well, to add to that, my name may have been Maria, but that was not the name that my mother gave me. That name I hold close to my heart. I was brought to the farm as a young girl, and as I grew, I would rise before dawn, before the others, bake the bread, tend to the children, clean the home. And I would also work in the garden, and in times of the harvest, I may also work in the fields and also tend to the animals. I do a lot of work, and while the master would say that it is divine, I also understand that there's a lot of hands that made this happen. Real hands, sweats, tears, blood that created this life. Our names might not be listed, but we were there.
Drew?
I'm
I'm sorry. Would you mind English?
hi.
Thank you.
My name is Blackcorn. I'm a Pocomoke person. My people are in the eastern shore of Maryland in the good graces of the Calverts, who are good Catholics, or were good Catholics till the English came and told them they could not be Catholics anymore. But we do not know much of the people of New York. We do not see much of them, but missionaries come. They come from Pennsylvania, and there are many people from New York. There are many of the Muncie-speaking people who speak a very different language than we do. And they come down and they tell us of Jesus, and they tell us of things that are happening farther north, and they come and they visit. And they tell us that there are many Dutch people that live in these lands. There are many English people that live in these lands. And that for a long time they were at war with these people. They have married some of these people and have made them family. But many of the people, they tire. They say it is hard to live in the places that they are in because more settlers come. More settlers require land. More settlers wish land for their cattle, land for their horses, and they bring with them the besan, they bring with them the rum, and they give the rum to the people, and the people take the rum, and they become caches, they become crazy, and they become angry at the things that they have lost, and they become angry at the people that are here, and they strike out, and they fight, and they burn barns, and they burn settlements, and they attack families, causing wars. They tell us of these things, and we hear about more and more of them coming to places like Shechamiko, coming to places like Bethlehem, the great town of the Moravian people. They come and live there. They wish, they say, to live in peace. They wish to say to live with Jesu, with Jesus. They wish to live in a Christian way. And they tell us that, brothers, if you wish to come up, and you wish to come up to the Christian lands with the Moravians, that we shall welcome you. We shall welcome you with open arms. But there are many of these people that come from New York that are going farther and farther west and farther south. And we see these people and we hear news of these people. A long time ago, we did not know of them. We did not know of their people or their language. They were too far away. But now we hear more and more of them. And we know that more of them are coming to these Christian towns, these Moravian towns, looking for protection, looking for a place to live in peace where they can farm and where they can plant, and where the settlers will not bother them.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Tom, would you give us some input as to, maybe draw some parallels with today?
Sure. So the indentured servants portrayed on the Bergen Overmantel, they very well may have been Palatine German in origin. The Palatine migration story really starts 1708, 1709. In a region of what's now Germany called the Palatine. And many people, as a result of famine, it was a very cold winter in that time frame. There was some famine. There was the War of Spanish Succession going on. And there's a Lutheran minister by the name of Reverend Joshua Cokerthal, who wrote something called the Golden Book. And the Golden Book promised great farmland in the New World, particularly in a place called Schoharie, or some variant of the spelling of Schoharie. So many people from the Palatine and other nearby principalities, they came down the Rhine River. Some wound up in the Netherlands. Many of them wound up in refugee camps outside of London. And many of them were sent on to New York, to Ireland, to North Carolina, North Carolina, what's now North Carolina. Back then they're just called the Carolinas. So they were sent to all these different places as a way to make use of their labor and get them out of the camps around London. So British Parliament and people in London didn't have to deal with refugee camps on the outskirts of their city. Here in the Hudson Valley, we have two main settlements, one called East Camp, which is now Germantown, and West Camp, which is still a largely undeveloped hamlet in the town of Saugerties on the west side of the river. East Camp was purchased from Robert Livingston the Elder in 1710, by Governor Robert Hunter. Robert Hunter was the provincial governor of New York at that time, and he purchased 6,000 acres back from Robert Livingston. So Robert Livingston in 1686 is given a provisional manor, claim to the manor, and that's the entire southern third of today's Columbia County. And he took 6,000 of those acres, most of which is, all of which is in the town of Germantown today, and sold it back to the state, or not the state, the provincial government at that time. The Robert Livingston also was given the contract to feed the Palatines, providing them with beer and bread for the duration of their time in East Camp. And in East Camp, those Palatines were expected to cut down pitch pine trees. So they were there for the purpose of producing pitch, turpentine, and resin for the British Navy. Up to that point, the British Navy was dependent on Russia, Scandinavia, for those products. So what the Queen Anne and the British government wanted was an in-house source of those products for the British Navy. Robert Livingston, the elder, the only Palatines who came up the river from New York City after they landed were the most physically able of the Palatines. Many Palatines died on the ships on the way over from London to New York. And then quite a few of them were sick to the point where they weren't very good as manual labor. And many of them were left behind on what's now Governor's Island in New York City. Only the most physically able came up to East and West Camp. In the fall of 1710, Livingston's ration list was 1,400 people. He's providing rations to 1,400 people. The following spring, it's down to about 1,100 or so. And for those couple of years, 1710, 11 into 1712, East Camp, which is now Germantown, was the second or third largest city in New York province. There was really not very heavily populated province at that time, and Livingston Manor was not very well populated with Europeans at that time. Part of what Livingston was getting out of the deal was getting settlers for his manor, which would legitimize his claim to having that manor, which was the entire southern third of Columbia County. And he got that because in 1712, the tar making scheme falls apart. Governments change in Parliament, and funding is pulled for the whole project. The Palatines who came up to East and West Camp were indentured for 7 years. They had worked about 2 on the tar project, and at that point they were not going to be fed by the British government through Robert Livingston for that winter. So many of the Palatines in East Camp left for Schoharie. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them, most notably the Weiser family, Conrad Weiser Sr. and Jr. They go out to Schoharie. They survive that winter at the mercy of some of the Mohawk Indians in that area. The ones who are left behind in East Camp, many of them fan out into Livingston Manor, so some go east out into Livingston Manor. At that point, many of them take tenant farm leaseholds. And the Livingston Manor had relatively generous leaseholds. However, it's the transition from indentured servant to tenant farmer, which is perhaps arguably, a little bit better. You mentioned Michael Duma, who's coming to speak soon. So my key takeaway from Duma's book was the centrality of wheat cultivation and the connection to slavery in colonial New York. On Livingston Manor in particular, though, rent from the tenant farmers was paid oftentimes in wheat, most often probably in wheat. And the tenants were the ones who produced most of the wheat on Livingston Manor. Most of the tenants on Livingston Manor were Palatine Germans in origin. And the Palatines that settle out there in Livingston Manor, they kind of have a love-hate relationship with the Livingstons over the next 50 to 75 years. Some of the sources I've been reading recently from the Revolutionary War era indicate that while most of the Livingston family remained on the Patriot side of the Revolutionary War, with a few exceptions, something like 70–80% of the Palatines on the manor, the tenant farmers, and also the people who eventually become freeholders in East Camp were loyalists, at least indifferent to borderline loyalists, because the Livingston family went the opposite direction. So they were kind of at odds politically for the next 50 to 100 years. Early on in 1710, there's an apprentice list that you can check to see if you have ancestors on that list. And the apprentices, those were children or teenagers of Palatines who either didn't survive the voyage over, died on the ship, and there's orphaned children. That was a pretty common occurrence. And the apprentices were basically lent out, and that was a different form of indentured servitude that the Palatines faced. Several of them were apprenticed to Robert Livingston the Elder himself, one of which was a lady by the name of Anna Katharina Rohrbach, and she wound up being she married Reverend Johann Frederick Hager. And Hager was the first minister among the Palatines. He was part of the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. And if you're familiar with the Legends and Lore sign that I recently got down in Germantown, she's portrayed in that story as the wife who's attending to the dying Reverend Hager, and Reverend Hager tells her to go take care of a sick child elsewhere, and then when she returns, Reverend Hager has passed away. Another, probably the most prominent apprentice Palatine is a man by the name of Johann Peter Zenger, and you've probably heard his name in relation to in relation to the free press. The freedom of the press trial happens in the 1740s, and he started out in 1710 as an apprentice to a printer named Bradford, and he had a newspaper in New York City. In later years, he spent some years in Maryland before returning to New York City and producing newspapers there.
Thank you. Lavada, we have not heard anything about how women lived in this time period. Could you give us some insight as to that?
First, thanks for this opportunity. And before we go to the 1730s, I just going to jump back to the New Netherland period and talk about the types of Dutch women that came here. Unlike British women that are the property of their husbands and their fathers, the Netherlands is very egalitarian. They are educating both the girls and the boys, and there really is no, I guess it's a family restriction, but less of a cultural restriction, if there are any, around their education. There are women who are called she merchants, and they are business women. That could be anything from a small business in town, or it could be like Margaret Hardenbrock, who came to New Netherland as a factor for a supercargo for her relative's business. So there is a strata of women that are arriving, but most of the initial settlers that come for New Netherland, the first women here were in fact not Dutch, they were French Walloons. So, but as Dutch women came here, again, you have that stratification. And then you have the women that are born here. So by the time we get into like the 1630s and the development of the patroons, which will ultimately become the manors, you have women who are helping to run businesses. With the establishment of Rensselaerwyck, you have a very powerful line of women in the Rensselaer family who end up running the manor when one of the patroons dies. So and then we have this slow growth, but the education of girls. We have information at some of our historic sites, like at Historic Huguenot Street within their collection, where you have documentation of boys and girls being taught, like multi-column ledger bookkeeping, right? So there is various variations. So when we look at women by the time we get to the 1730s, that is something just to keep in mind. Not all of them are highly educated, but they're more educated than a lot of the British women are. And also, since I'm normally talking from the enslaved perspective, so it's a little different to be stepping on the other side, one of the things that in the early information of Dutch women that we're missing is a lot of their papers. It is that transitional first generation. How are these women coming together? In a recent conversation with a colleague in New York City, who they're doing some filming and saying, how in her desire for a program, she wanted to have 17th century women, Dutch women, African women, and Native women almost having like a exchange of information around herbals, like we all have these herbs and we're all going to come together and we're all going to have this great sisterhood, all of us. And I'm like, no. Let's get real here. Because as my colleague said, right, it is a difference of culture and there is a different level of respect. And what I'm finding myself these days wondering, what did the average Dutch person really know about Africa? Right? What do these people coming here really know about the culture? And we know very early that in the Dutch period, there is a removal of children from the indigenous to educate them and to bring them over. And as a mother, I'm like, what are you doing? Right? So how were those initial Dutch women and how does this play out as we go up? With the introduction of wheat as the cash crop of New York in 1930s, wealth is starting to flow in. And that wealth then really does establish the lives of these women. It takes a while, but by the time we get to 1730, New York is one of the largest producers of wheat that's going into the Caribbean and West Indies, and that's bringing a lot of wealth into the colony. That's bringing, that whole transatlantic trade. The Dutch merchants are the traders. The Anglo-Dutch, they start very early into marrying. So you have young women that are growing up to marry into these other families to manage that wealth and to keep the wealth of the elite growing, and we will see that continue as we go into the 18th century. But right now we have women like the Schuylers, women like the Livingstons, women like, the Phillips women, all of these women who are intermarrying and running these households then that are a mix of the need to have a certain level of British service within their house when they're entertaining, but also to maintain Dutch culture. We can see that in the receipt books that they left. There, we have a wealth of receipt books from Dutch women, many of them in English, with only the earlier ones being in Dutch, and they are being translated. Alida van Rensselaer, her papers are being translated from Dutch into English. So these sources for women are there. And they are having to change and adapt. They're having to learn how to work with enslaved. They are having to manage these estates that are growing, or they're the tenant farmers' wives that eventually will come in. A lot of the tenant farmers are from other European nations, not necessarily Dutch, but even within that middling and that lower working class, they may have one enslaved person, and that could be a male field hand. And here's a woman who has to decide, is this man sitting at my table or where is he eating every day? So those kinds of things do come into play. But then you also, by 1730, you have women in the upper classes who are on the level of women in England coming out of these manor houses because of the wealth. But they are also very religious. So we see their work in the Dutch Reformed Church. A lot of their records are there as well. So it is this large strata of different kinds of women, but also educated women, women who when the British take over, many of the Dutch families and the Anglo-Dutch families maintain Dutch tradition, even though it is not law. They're still leaving wealth to their daughters. It's not just a dowry, right? So there is a far greater range for me looking at it, particularly the collections. When we look at their choices in the things that are in their homes, they're buying to reflect the wealth of their husbands. And so we see that over and over again. But throughout the state, particularly in the lower Hudson River Valley, in Albany, and Schenectady, now even starting to go up into the Mohawk River Valley, we really are starting to look more at the women's papers. But there have been, early books written on, like Catherine Schuyler. There is a book on women of the house that talks about the different women within the Phillips family. So you see that strata of elite women. But the level of women's research that we are missing really are those that are in the tenant class. Those are in the middling class. Where are their papers? They're somewhere or not. They're probably in some historic society. But what we do see of them are them maintaining the Dutch traditions, even the cookbooks or the receipt books of women in the 1730s, 1750s, going into the 1780s. They're still keeping those early Dutch recipes for the pancakes and the olykoeks and all of those dishes that are holiday dishes and that they appear. But their material culture they're leaving behind, we're seeing, beautiful silk gowns and silk dresses, and you have so many paintings of these women going from that almost vernacular folk art stance in that early period all the way to portraits that are emulating those of Europe. So we have a lot more research to do. We're putting the women back into place as we look at our history, and we're all trying to do this, our whole history concept, putting everybody back in place. But I think that for all of the women of all of the cultures, we still have a lot of information to find.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I have a question actually for Karla. In these days, in the 21st century, most of our historical knowledge about enslaved people is focused on the South, and in the South, enslaved people lived in, slave cabins out in the back portion of the property. And we don't see anything like that in this picture. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how and where you live.
I will say, I will give it an aside. I don't see anything there either, but from my research, I saw that they might have lived in cellars. They might have had some kind of smaller home, but I didn't see anything related to it. And that might be as far as I want to say without guessing incorrectly.
That's fair. That's fair. And Pekatawas, is that correct? I have to keep saying that name over and over again. Can you tell us a little bit about how you live?
In the 21st century?
No. In your time.
So for our people, traditionally, this is a time very much of change. And so by the 1730s, many people are still living in wigwams, which are domed homes made of trees and bark. We have for our sachems and their extended families, Machikamak, which is a big house, which is about, for us, 30 to 40 feet long and about 11 to 12, maybe about 15 feet wide, and it has about one central fireplace. For us, our beds, for a wigwam, go around the circle of the home, and for the longhouse, go around in an oval. The Machikamak serves as our council house. It also serves as our meeting house. However, with Christianity, things are constantly changing, and more Native people are leaving wigwams and longhouses, and they're starting to build European-style homes. They're starting to build what sometimes are dubbed as Indian cabins, which are built with wood and have a central fireplace, usually are one floor. but look almost like a European-style home. And we're starting to see those by the 1730s, 40s, and 50s. We know for our community and our sister communities that there are longhouses, there are wigwams well to the end of the 18th century. Especially in Cambridge, Maryland, they were still said to be wigwams there in 1790 when the Choptank Reservation was taken away by the colony of Maryland. But at this period, still many of our people are living in wigwams. They're still living in longhouses or machicamak. They're very different than Iroquoian longhouses, which are much, much bigger. But they're still living in those things. But this time is definitely a time of change. We are feeding ourselves through corn, beans, and squash, horticulture, hunting, fishing, trapping, crabbing, fowling are all ways we're sustaining ourselves. By the 1730s, we are adopting some European root vegetables. We're also adopting some animal husbandry, things like chickens and pigs. Part of the reason for that, with more and more Europeans, these people come and they want lands. Their fathers were decent people. Their fathers wished to live in peace with us. And they wished to live as friends and as brothers, but their children were born hungry for land because some of these younger sons could not inherit the land that their fathers had. Their older brothers got that land. So they wanted more. And they wanted more. And the colony of Maryland was very desperate to have people on the eastern shore. And they said even if they were Virginians who came from across the water, that they would honor their patents as long as they became Marylanders. And so they took more and more land and desired more and more land. Why is that a problem to us? Well, for our people, we hunt, we fish, we trap, and we grow our crops. It takes 1,000 mounds of corn, beans, and squash to feed one family of 4 for an entire year. Our villages range from anywhere to 50 to 200 people. And that requires 50,000 to 200,000 mounds of corn, beans, and squash to feed us. We follow the game, we follow the fish. We do our seasonal migrations. We follow where the nut-bearing trees are. But if more and more Europeans come and they cut down the nut-bearing trees, they cut down the walnuts, they cut down the pecans, they cut down the hickory trees. They bring their cattle, which go into our, the meadows where we hunted rabbits, where we hunted turkeys, where we hunted passenger pigeons and other things. If they then claim and they say they own the waters, we cannot fish in those waters, nor can we crab in them, for they'll shoot us. What do we do? How do we supply food with ourselves? And so we would take small livestock to try to sustain ourselves, to have a food source, because we weren't able to maintain our hunting and fishing and crabbing, even though the colony of Maryland said that this right for us was inviolable, meaning that it could not be violated, which is stated in multiple treaties during the 17th and 18th century. But it's a time of difficulty and it's a time of change.
Wow. It's a lot. Jump in.
Sorry,
No, go
if I
ahead.
may. Answer actually what you had asked, Karla, because of the painting. For enslaved people, particularly in urban environments, they lived either in the garret, which we would now call the attics, or they were in the basements. We have several places like the Van Allen house here in Kinderhook where we know that they were in the basement. But as we get into the farming area and moving up, we're seeing a shift in Dutch structures. And if we look at the house, you see that the different colors of the roof line in that smaller structure. In many cases, those are actually an additional kitchen area. We tend to see these on farms because of the level of processing of food that needs to be done in season. You can't do that at the same time you've got to cook food for your family, particularly when they are the cook of no matter whether she is a European or an enslaved African, she's cooking not just for the family, but for everyone that is on that property. But when the crops are coming in and it's strawberry season and you need to make jam, or if you need to do all that preservation work, that's too much work to happen within the houses. So architectural and archaeological research right now is looking at remains that we're finding in some of these additional structures. So it is often believed that, particularly in farms, as we come above Kingston, going into the upper part of the Hudson River Valley, this area going up into the Mohawk region, that the enslaved are actually living in that small house. We also have places where, when the farms are, whether they are freeholds or things like Sir William Johnson's property up in Johnstown, New York. The men who are part of the field work are actually living in a separate structure. They are living out in the fields, and one of them are often cooking for those men that are living there. So depending upon the size of the household, or depending upon the size of the people of the farms, there is that separation. So we see more separate living quarters outside of the urban space, but what we do not see are those rows of small cabins, repeated cabins that you will see in a southern plantation environment. Thank you.
So I'm curious, how in the 1730s you all don't speak English universally. So how do you communicate in your various languages and cultures?
Well, because I came to live in a Dutch family, I spoke Dutch with perhaps some African inflections and maybe even some English words, but Dutch would be my main language that I spoke with your slavers and others.
Great. And Jim, how do you learn how to communicate with all these people from different cultures around you?
They speak Dutch, or I don't know.
You top the food chain.
I speak some English, but mostly Dutch.
All right. Okay. And so, do you think there were interpreters around, or were you relying on hand signals? I mean, if you're doing trading with your native neighbors, how does that work?
I'm loath to speculate. I don't know the answer to that. In my museum upbringing years ago with historic Hudson Valley, I was always taught, if you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know. So that's an answer, I don't know.
But I would guess, and this is definitely speculation, but I would think the person who is at the top of the food chain, they're not necessarily going to be as interested in learning our language. So just kind of like, I would assume, and forgive me, historian freedom going here, saying that I imagine it would be on us to figure out and learn very quickly how to figure that out.
Do you have any input on that you could tell us?
Language is important. For our people, language is always important. But for our people, we have orators. And the orators are the ones that speak for the chiefs. For the chiefs don't talk, the orators do. And the orator's job is to know not only the common language, the short, the informal language, but also the formal language, which takes a long time to say. But also, they know the dialects of other people. They know the dialects of some of the Dashantanapi, the outsider people, the stranger people. They know some of their languages, but they also know some of the dialects from neighboring people. We meet many traders. And we trade with many Europeans, and so a lot of times we speak with some of these English they call pidgin. It's a mixed language, which some have written as people speaking bad Indian. But it is enough that we can communicate. Sometimes it has a little bit of English, a little bit of Dutch, a little bit of other languages mixed with one or two different dialects, and we use it as a trade language. We do not wish to speak our formal language with the Dashantanapi because they do not have the patience to listen. They say that we speak too short and we speak too little when we speak our informal dialect. So we speak pidgin to them and they understand this trade dialect. And that is usually what we use when we go and meet them, trade for things. They give us, when we go and work for them. Many people, we work on their farms for things. Sometimes they pay us in rum or brandy. Sometimes they pay us in food. Sometimes we'll go to farms and we'll trade turkeys and they will give us rum. But we speak a pidgin together. But there are many people who speak some of these languages. They have learned to speak the language of the Dutch people. They've learned to speak the language of the French people. They've learned to speak the language of the English people. Some of them very good and some of them not very good. But we are learning their languages and they are happy to teach us their languages so that we can talk better. Some of us who become Christians, they give us Christian names. They give us names like James, or they give us names like John, or sometimes names that they say are good names, like Robin Hood, which they say is a good name. Or they give us names that they laugh and we do not understand why, names like Cocksure, or things, other names like that, which they say are humorous names, and we do not understand why. But they say when you become Christian, you must take a Christian name. You must have this. That is the way for Jesus to know who you are. And so there are many Christian people that we know who are now called James or John or Nicholas, or they have Dutch names such as Han. Or Hendrik. There are many native people that we know that they call themselves Hendrik or Hendrik, and the Dutch or the English people call them Hendrik or John, and that's how they know them.
Very interesting. Cocksure. Okay, all right. I apologize on behalf of
Robin Hood is a good man. I
us.
have met him once. He was a good man.
But Katawas, you have more than once now mentioned rum. And I think I learned that rum was one of the things that was traded as part of the transatlantic slave trade. Can you talk about how that affected your community?
So one of the first things when the English and when the Dutch came, they brought with them the bessen. They brought with them the alcohol, which we did not have here. We did not know what this was. And we tell the story of this man in red, you call him Hudson, who came up this river. And we have told the story. We know the story of that Hudson brought this man aboard a ship. And in friendship and fellowship, he said to him, "Brother, sit. I wish to give you a gift." And he poured him in a glass, a liquid, which this man did not know what it was. But because we are a polite people and he gave us a gift, we must drink what he gave us. And this man became very, very drunk. And the people on Hudson's ship, they laughed at him. They laughed at him for his foolishness and that he became so drunk so quick. But this man came to, and with his interpreter, he said to Hudson that this was Kich Toa, this was very strong, this was a very powerful spiritual experience that he had. He had not experienced anything like this. And the Shantanapi, they learned very quickly. They learned very quickly that we did not have a tolerance for alcohol, that we would become drunk and intoxicated far quicker than they would. And we would become kashez, we would get crazy, we would get violent, we would get loud. Things that we do not often do when we are in a normal state of mind. And so the Shantanapi, they are smart people in many ways, and they understood that the Danapi, the people, could not tolerate the alcohol. And they said, because they are good arguers, they are good bargainers, we shall give them the alcohol, and they shall drink it, and they will become intoxicated and make better deals. And they shall do business much better. And so whenever we come to trade, whenever we make treaties for land or for territory, they say, we must celebrate, brothers. And they bring out the alcohol, they bring out the bessen, and they give it to us. When we do good things for the colonies, they say, brothers, you have done good things, we must give you a gift. And they give us bottles of the alcohol, they give us bottles of the rum. And they say, it is a gift for you. And our people, unfortunately, they like the bessen. They like how it tastes. Before the bessen, we had very little sugar. Very, very little, only coming from the maple trees, only coming from the fruits, only coming from sweet things that the earth could provide us. The green corn that comes up, which if you eat is very, very sweet. And so when we have the bessen, it is very, very sweet. And we like how sweet it is. But it also makes us forget our troubles, makes us forget how angry we are. And when we drink it, we become angry. It allows us to become angry. And it has caused many problems with our people. The elders and the councils and the chiefs have said, they've complained. Here in New York, in Maryland, they have complained. They said, it has made our young people kashez. It has made them crazy. We cannot talk to them. We cannot speak to them. They will not listen to us. And why is this bad? Because they go out on raids and they strike out on raids and they take captives, bringing trouble to our villages. We wish not that the English or the Dutch sell us the bessen, for they know it is harmful. They have written in their books that it is harmful, and they know this, and they have known this for a long time. But they continue because they know it makes the Indians more pliable in trade, and that we desire it. And so there are laws that have been passed that say, Dutchmen, Englishmen, you should not sell the Indian alcohol. You should not sell him the bessen, the rum, or the brandy. It is not good for him. But, as many of the people have said here, New York, this province is very big, and there's not a lot of people. So who can enforce these laws? Who can go to Fort Amsterdam and say that these laws have been broken? Who can go to Annapolis and say these laws have been broken? That's several days' journey for most people. Many things can happen in a week. Many things. And so these laws, though they are written on the paper, are not always adhered to, especially in the rural areas. And many people know the Indians come and they want the brandy, they want the rum. And who are the English or the Dutch to stop them when they do work? For the Dutchmen, they'll say, this man worked on my farm, and the law says I must pay him, and I have paid him. I have paid him in the brandy, I have paid him in rum, and I have given him his payment. For is it not legal tender in this colony? And the courts, they fold. They don't know what to say. But the alcohol has caused us many problems. And we, some of us do not drink it. They don't want it, but there are many people who do. And you will always come to our villages and you will find bottles. You will find them in homes. You will find them in longhouses. You will find them. And sometimes they sell great quantities too. Big treaties, sometimes they will sell anchors. An anchor is 10 gallons. Sometimes 4 anchors, sometimes 5. And they will give us for doing good things, for selling land, for being good friends to the colony. When we see foreign Indians come and we report them, they give us the alcohol. But these things must stop. It causes too much problems.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lavada, a question for you, because we're on the subject of rum. I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about the things, how the triangle slave trade worked and what was going from where to where during the transatlantic slave trade.
When we went to school, we learned about the transatlantic slave trade and the triangular trade, right? Rum, sugar, molasses to rum to slaves. What is missing? Sugar. What is missing? Wheat. New York's wheat is going to the Caribbean. That is being traded for many things. We're not only sending wheat there, we're sending salted cod, we're sending pickled oysters, we're sending lumber. We're also putting all of these things out on the international market, but a lot of the wheat, majority of the wheat is actually going to the Caribbean. From there, the merchant traders are picking up things. Oh, butter is also a big export of ours. They're picking up sugar, they're picking up molasses, they are picking up some distillates, but please know, at the State Museum right now, you can see an artifact of a rum distillery that was in the Albany area on display, and it has been there for many years. So we were actually distilling that here as well. It wasn't just up in the Northeast. They're picking things like logwood, other kind of dyestuffs. They're taking some of that here into the colony, so sugar is pretty good here, and the rest of it is going from here to Europe. That money then, of course, is funding the ships then that are bringing the enslaved African. The Dutch controlled the slave castles that the Portuguese used to control. In Congo, they have Elmira, they have others, and they're bringing them either into Curacao or directly here into New York, right? So that trade, it's not always on the same ship, right? It's just multiples. It is just about how products are moving. For themselves, the Dutch and the English are actually not drinking the rum. They are bringing in Madeira. They are bringing in French brandy. They are bringing in wines. So there is a consciousness of the effects of alcohol. And that's also one of the reasons that coffee, tea, and cocoa are so popular, because it's the first time that Europeans have access to caffeinated drinks. Caffeine, otherwise they're drinking weak beer, even we're covered with breweries. So although we're distilling rum here for their own consumptions, it's beer. It's all sorts of beer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I have a question sort of broadly for the panel. When I was doing the research on this painting, I was really fascinated by these sort of octagonal yellow structures over here. And since we're talking about wheat, what I found out is that they're called hay barracks, and they are where hay would be stored, and the floor, I believe, as I understand it, could go up and down. and they could have, as this painting has chickens being fed underneath. And I wonder if any of you could speak to farming practices or talk more about the hay barracks, like how would, because this is a big agricultural area, if you could, any of you talk more about farming in this area. Jump in. No, I asked the wrong question. Okay.
So there are a couple of different levels of farming here. You have what is provisioning for the family, and then you have what is then for the trade. We have large estates. They start off being called patroons. They're then turned into manors. That's just the English title. And that's where we get the term the Lord of the Manor, like Livingston Manor. And unlike a plantation is a single farm, a large tract of land worked as a single farm by a resident labor force. Think in terms of George Washington's Mount Vernon, 50,000 acres, 317 enslaved when he died. Our equivalent is Phillips Manor, 50,000 with an additional 2,000 acres that they steal from the indigenous later on. It is not worked as a single farm. We have a medieval Renaissance practice brought here. Remember, we're started by a company. They don't want to spend a lot of money bringing people over here, so they give an opportunity for people, starting with Kilian van Rensselaer in this area. You're on Rensselaerweg, where he has almost 1 million acres of land. For the Phillips example, Lower Manhattan, coming off King Bridge all the way up to about mid Westchester County, 50,000 acres of land. The family controlled 2 houses. Always the manor houses are near a major river, right? So the Yonkers house has 2 mills, a lumber mill and a grist mill running 3 sets of stones. The upper mill has 2 sets of stones. The rest of the farms, the rest of that acre is broken into small farms, 150 to 200 acres in size, leased to Northern European tenants who are also enslavers, right? So that's where that farming is. So those individual farms are growing wheat, but because they are tenants, the tenant agreements say you have to use the mills of the landowners. So they're bringing those to Phillips here in this area where you have a lot of freeholds. The Van Burens own a whole lot of land. 2, they have tenants. Paskapsi, not pronouncing that right, Island, had like 3 or 4 farms on it. They had on average 10 to 15 enslaved men working those farms. Why? Because they're growing wheat. That wheat then gets threshed, goes to either the freeholds or the closest mill, then that happens and goes out. In terms of the rest of the farming, that is European food. If you look at Adrian van der Donk's description of New Netherland, throughout that book, he gives lists of foodstuffs that the Europeans bring here. Predominantly, everything we eat today is European. All of our vegetables, all of that, except for now we're into the pumpkins and the squashes. So some of those are native, but the majority of the foods we eat are in fact European. So you have then that level of provisioning. But of course, remember, this is not a cute little backyard garden. They have to produce enough food to feed their family for a year or more. So you're eating it, you're preserving it, you're storing it, right? So that, so when we think about the work that the enslaved are doing, these women, yeah, they're taking care. This looks all really cute and nice right here, but on a farm like that, those kids had chores, right? They're out working in the gardens. The enslaved women have chores when it's all hands on deck. Like right now, when we get into making apple cider, when we get into making apple vinegar, everybody's got to get in there and do that work. So when we think of farming in these areas, the large portion of the farms are given over to wheat and gray peas, because peas are also dried and ground, and they're used to mix in with the flour, bastardize it a little bit. But that's what we also have a lot of Dutch recipes for pea soup, right? So it's those kinds of things. And then within that garden structure, you have your cabbages, you have your brassicas, you have, all of those things. Every farm, the first thing established are the orchards. It is apple trees, pear trees, and everybody is growing peaches, right? And peaches show up as one of the few things on every list of things that you cannot sell to an enslaved person. There's a peach, right? Why? I don't know, but we've got peaches and brandy showing up as a way to preserve peaches, and a lot of the manuscript cookbooks. And if you've never had them, give them a try. They're pretty fabulous. And that's why New York still grows peaches, right? We grow peaches in this area. They brought those in the 17th century. They have all different kinds of cherries and all of that kind of fruit. If it grows here, it is being grown here. They're adjusting to the temperate zone. Remember, this is the end of the Little Ice Age, so some things really don't quite flourish, but the only thing that's a real failure are broad beans. But we have a lot of indigenous beans in this area. There's several kinds of black beans. There's several kinds of red beans. There is even something that looks like a black-eyed pea, except the center eye is brown, not black. So you have that whole mixture, and that adaptation of indigenous product and European product also happens during the Dutch period. In the receipt books, you will have things like pumpkin pancakes. When Peter Kalm, I had come up with his name, Peter Kalm, an apostle of Linnaeus, comes, and his focus is on North America. And we learn a lot about what is happening in the 1730s and 40s because of his visit. It is where we get a recipe or a description of coleslaw. And he talks about his landlady cutting it very thin and mixing it in what she's mixing it with. He also talks about a pumpkin pancake, where pumpkin is being added to a pancake recipe. The adaptation of a pumpkin pie, that is created here. That is not a European dish. It is a custard pie that happens to have pumpkin in it, right? So all of those adaptations are going back and forth, and that even beyond not selling the indigenous rum, they also, there are laws in Albany where they couldn't sell them anything with sugar in it, right? You can't sell them the sweet breads. You can't sell them the breads. They're not used to the white flour, and there is not enough of that product at times if wheat crop fails for the Europeans. The Dutch are, there's a new scholar actually just came from Leiden who is looking at when they describe when they're starving, right? And anytime a Dutch person is starving, it is because they don't have bread and beer, right? So those are the things when things are lean that they pull back from selling to the indigenous, and those are showing up on the account book. So there's a lot of different kind of farming, but we are not called plantations here, we're called provisioning plantations, because the point is to grow the food and go make money for it. It is not about just sustaining. This is a colony that goes from New Netherlands to New York, whose cash crop, just as important as sugar, tobacco, rum, that cash crop is wheat. And that wheat is like when I said Yonkers had 3 sets of stones and 2 sets of stones. The record at Phillipsburg Manor, Upper Mills, is in season, they're making 5,000 pounds of flour a day. Wow. Okay, this is commercial. Do not think this is some quaint little deal. No, this is commercial. This is where so much of the wealth of New York comes from 2 things, and both are around slavery. It is the people who are doing the work and all of the economic ties that bring wealth into New York. From the very beginning, it is all about slavery.
What about corn? When do we start to use that from the indigenous people?
Immediately, because remember, when the Dutch come here, this is considered an occupied wilderness. And a study I just came across, 10 years ago, Harvard did a study about some of our oldest forests here in New York. So they're looking at trees that are like 300 years old. So when you think about the Dutch coming here, when you think about them clearing all of that land for thousands and thousands of acres of wheat, it's a whole lot of trees that gotta come down. So they immediately start adapting a lot of the indigenous practices, particularly the use of corn, because it takes a while to take down a 300-year-old tree. But that is some of the initial work of the enslaved, starting in Manhattan and going all the way out. It's all been cleared. I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if one of those could have been corn crib instead of a wheat spare.
It could have been, but grain of all kinds. So the hay is actually what is left, right?
Right.
So when you have wheat, you're threshing it, and then you have all of this stuff left. But you have livestock you have to feed. You have things that you have to do with it.
Right.
And they're also used for drying that grain. And that's the difference between an English barn and a Dutch barn. A Dutch barn is designed for drying the grain. That's why they have the orientation of the doors, the pitch of the roof, everything is about drying that grain.
And what about the fence? Nobody's talked about the fence.
The fences to keep yeah, but you know what? We have very elaborate fences, and they are generally just in that immediate property around the house. As you go out to where the animals are, you have really I can't think of the name of the type of fencing, but it's literally it's just two logs that are crossing each other and supporting each other. So you will have that, but we do have many historic examples of split rail fencing.
Well, that's a pretty solid fence. Is it keeping the animals in or out?
Probably out. Because, you know, they got hogs and stuff like that, and they're like wandering around. Controlling the livestock is one of the things that comes up a lot, but they are generally keeping them off.
Drew, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
All I was going to say is keep in mind with corn, like it's not sweet corn. Sweet corn doesn't come to the colonies till 1780 in the Sullivan campaign. A lot of people don't know that. They just think, oh, old-timey Europeans with tricorn hats, everyone's eating sweet corn, and they're not. It's flint corn. It's all dry flint corn that's being turned to hominy, meal, flour. Keep in mind, Europeans find, except most Europeans, and it's not everyone, find a lot of indigenous food beneath them. And for a lot, like cornmeal is seen as an incredibly impoverished person's food. To the point we have records in the Revolutionary War where British soldiers would lance bags of cornmeal and laugh at the poverty of the American colonists, because in Europe, and it still is this way, corn is animal fodder. It's not consumable for humans generally. And look at what Europeans do to pizza in Europe. They dump cans of cream corn on it. It's awful. They don't know what to do with it. It would be I guess if someone gave us like a raw beet and just said, well, have at it. This is your food. But a lot of those things too, Europeans start transitioning to things like corn, because especially when the early settlements happen, a lot of European crops fail. And they fail because one of the things they found out recently is that it's believed now, and this comes out of the Smithsonian, that prior to Europeans, there were no earthworms in our soil, and that earthworms were imported from Europe. Why is that important? Earthworms create nitrogen, and they till up the soil underground, and wheat, barley, all of those European cereal grains that were beginning to be grown at the end of the Bronze Age, like the Middle Bronze Age, require earthworms to till up that soil, which you have in Europe, the Middle East, or the Levant. You have all those things. So when they went to go plant their wheat, their barley, all of those things, they failed. And the corn, the beans, the squashes thrived because we knew to put things like fish and other things underneath the mountains, which is a nitrogen fixer. And that's why you read these things where they say, oh, put this fish underneath the mound, because if you have a soil with no earthworms, it's entirely different and there's no nitrogen fixer. So it's one of those things that Europeans had to learn how to eat corn. They had to learn about squashes, and they were familiar with some. Vanderdonk writes about that they grow calabashes, gourds, they grow things that are similar to stuff that we've seen from the Middle East or from Europe, and that they're similar to things. I think I just was reading in Vanderdonk, he said, children and women love watermelons, and he said that they were growing them in lower New York. But I thought it was odd that he said specifically children and women, not adult men. They disdain the water, but women and children particularly. But it's one of those things where just keep that in mind too. Is that corn was one of those things that like this guy's neighbor being like, man, are you okay? Like you sure? Like you're eating corn? Like is anyone sick? Like, you know, you were really impoverished, like to be eating corn is like a staple of your diet.
It was not made though, but the Dutch did adapt it, and they adapted the cornmeal as a dinner. It is called sampan, and it's actually a cornmeal mush with a hole put in the center for cream or milk, and they channel it out, and then everyone eats it. But the Dutch do, but as I said, that's why they're growing wheat. You're correct. They want white wheat bread and good beer. And that's one of the issues that they had with the Palatine, that was how they were to pay them, was beer and bread.
Wow.
So did the Europeans deliberately introduce earthworms? Or did they
It's
come
probably
up-
by accident. So, because one of the things Vanderdonk is very specific. Now, he writes this book in 1647. It's published upon his death in 1655. And read it. If you don't, it's a $20 book. It will change your life. There's a lot of interesting tidbits. There's a lot of funny stories he tells in there. One of them, he contends that the earth may indeed be flat, but that he was not smart enough to really know the answer at that point. He also tells a very humorous story about lizards. But anyway, and also beavers. But anyway, he talks about all of these fruit trees being imported from Europe and being brought here specifically for propagation. American Indians take to peaches incredibly well, same with apple trees. One of the things that by the 1770s is heavily recorded in Sullivan's campaign is that they were amazed at the Senecas and the Onondagas and the Finger Lakes with the vast peach and apple orchards that they had. The Pequots, the Montauks, the Shinnecocks were also well known to have adopted peaches to the point where in Long Island, some of these peach trees were literally bending over from the weight of peaches that were on them. The Haudenosaunee have the peach stone game. It was that much became an adopted food source, that they're utilizing pieces of the fruit for recreational activities. But so in these plantings are earthworms from Europe that are just being plopped in the ground, and then they're just taking to it.
I remember reading somewhere, this is a complete digression, but it's a cocktail party question. What are the only 3 Native American fruits native to America? Does anyone know?
Well, it depends what you consider a fruit or a berry.
Well, they're fruits,
Okay.
in the joke.
Okay.
One is persimmon.
Tell us.
One is persimmons.
No.
No? Okay, what?
Blueberries, cranberries, and Concord grapes.
That's from the Northeast.
Yeah.
None of those grow in other parts because blackberries are also indigenous.
Raspberries,
Wineberries.
persimmons are, you have pawpaws, persimmons, and so some of these plants, like, I don't know, Lavada, you could probably answer this better than I could, that it's speculated that pawpaws may have been in like lower New York at one point in the 17th century.
I know them from other parts of the country.
Yeah, I've heard it's a very speculated kind of thing, but they were cut down so early that
It's
now
like southern.
it's so the range of pawpaws, it's a giant indigenous fruit. It's said to have been brought to much of the Northeast through megafauna during the last glacial period. It's a cross between a banana and a mango. It's this tropical tree that migrated up. It can either be really good or really bad. The ones that are planted in the Northeast are awful. And they're consistently awful.
Yeah, because it's dependent on it.
You go to the Potomac River and they're the most delicious thing you've ever eaten ever. But their range really starts southeastern Pennsylvania. It's like, Berks, Chester County, York County, Pennsylvania, going down into Maryland.
We have a question in the back.
I read that the earthworms got here because the trading ships couldn't come back empty, so they had to just fill them with something. And they were
Oh, with ballast? Yeah, so that could be it too. What I had read from Smithsonian, they believed it was from the plantings from trees and other plants, but it could be ballast too. I had one of my professors found a Neolithic European flint-knapped hand axe on a beach in like Long Island, and it was from ship ballast that was thrown off in the 18th century, and these sailors in the 18th century had no idea that they just threw a Neolithic stone tool from Europe
So they
on a beach.
use loose soil for
for balance?
Yeah, so you have to balance your ship
Well, I
on the
understand,
ocean.
but I always thought
So when
New York cobbles were.
Stones work too, and then they fill it up with more stones, which I've never understood, because if you have stones in there that are working, why do you need new stones? Put in there, the stones-
Take them out in New York and make streets.
Yeah.
I guess. And then
That's what it was.
yeah, I guess, but it's one of the things. So we have rocks from Europe that are here, and Europe has rocks from here that are there.
So maybe the earthworms are also kind of the way we've gotten stink bugs and lanternflies in the last
Yeah.
few years. Like,
One of
kind of came accidentally, but
Yeah.
now they're here. Interesting. Any other questions from the audience?
You didn't speak much about relationships between those that are on the or inside the painting. How much, you mentioned about food and where they might have eaten, but how much did they relate to each other and, the sexual?
Wait, what did you say?
Yeah, no, she said that. She said that. It's okay. We're all grown-ups in here.
So, all right, I mean, I'll go. So, one of the things we find is that human beings are human beings, and that they, especially men who are on ships, it gets pretty boring on a ship with other guys for 6 months. And so one of the things, you can read this in Robert Roberts, the First Manhattans. He says that even by the 1620s, there are Indian children being born with curly hair and blue eyes. But you have to remember, there's no concept of bastardy in Eastern Woodland society because we're matrilineal kinship society. So who you're related to is through your mom and your mom's clan. So it doesn't really matter who your dad is. So if your dad wasn't in your life, it doesn't really matter. You're being raised by your mom and her family. We find that there are intermarriages of free Africans and poor whites in the 18th century. Especially among Christian Indian populations. They're kind of seeing themselves as brothers in Christ. They're kind of seeing themselves as kind of Christian fellowship. But we do find multiple intermarriages, and these people stay generally within the area and intermarry sometimes into other mixed race populations and sometimes into singular races that they, are in. But it's certainly a thing. It certainly does happen. Some of these people are listed as mulattoes, some of them are listed as white or black, but it's certainly a thing that does happen.
And you can imagine there's also, for enslaved women, she is vulnerable. She's vulnerable to all kinds of violence, including sexual. Not to say that there wasn't any consensual kind of relations going on, but definitely there was what happens when a woman has not as much agency as she would like to have, and she would be taken advantage of, exploited. Now, Jim, what did we learn about, there were no miscegenation laws
In New York State.
in New York State like there was in Virginia. So there's, when you don't have a law against something, you might have more leeway for that kind of thing, but we were actually, because we're married. I know, but back in those days, that would not have happened. But it's just very interesting when you see the different laws that existed in the North or that didn't exist in the North versus what did happen in the South. So, for example, I learned this from Lavada. For example, we hear about in the South, it was illegal for slaves to learn, or enslaved people to learn how to read, but there was no official laws against that. We don't know necessarily whether or not.
There were none, but I'm sorry, let's get clear here. Women were raped.
Okay.
Straight out.
Yeah.
We just did an exhibit at Claremont called Redefining the Family, where a Pennsylvania legislator whose family's oral history connected them to the Livingstones. Through his research and DNA, it was proven. We had, from the 17th century going forward, people described as yellow. Then they become mulatto. Then they become colored. Then they become Negro or black. But it's all over. We do have issues right now among how some of our indigenous in our area are looked at. They don't qualify as federal recognized because they are made up of people who are mixed race. And that's right here in New York State. The law changes for inheritance. In British law, everything goes to the oldest male. But if your white wife has a white child, but your black enslaved person has a boy, he cannot inherit. So they changed the law. And the placement of the child is the status of the mother. That is not British law. That is US law. That is law here. So, we want to dance around these things, but please understand, from the very beginning of New Netherlands, we are a multicultural, multi-ethnic, and becoming a unique experience as Americans because of the relationships between different men and women of different races, whether that was by choice or not. And it happens all the way through. We do not have a breeding society here in New York, but there are a lot of blacks or people of color in New York who can trace their family lineages back to the 17th century. And all of the various ethnic groups in our area are showing up in those bloodlines.
I would say, I'm from Ulster County, I would say we don't have laws against miscegenation or mixing, but what we do see very early in the late 1600s and early 1700s are laws being made about what happens to the children of those relationships. So whether it's between a native person or an enslaved person, those laws come out to be almost always, if the woman is enslaved, the child is the property of her enslaver. Yes. If the woman is free, the child is free. So it's clearly not just happening, it is happening enough that they're writing laws about it.
And that even
it's
goes
an issue
all through, even for gradual abolition. Gradual abolition, any child born to an enslaved woman after July the 4th, 1799 is born free, but is bound to the mother's enslaver until they are 25 or 28 years old. 1817, they're bound till they are 21. So if you're born July the 3rd, 1827, you are bound to your mother's enslaver for the next 21 years, when in fact the next day, legal slavery ends in the state.
Wow. And it was enforced.
And it was enforced.
One of the people that I've been researching lately in one of the Black Van Allen line, and this blew my mind. This person had 3 children, and the oldest one was born in 1794, enslaved for the rest of her life. The middle one is born in Massachusetts, which had already abolished slavery, so the middle child is free, and the youngest child is born in 1799, so he would have been enslaved until he was 28. So he has 3 children. All 3 children have a different legal status.
I'll also add, too, it was advantageous for free Africans to marry Indian women because, just like we've all said, because now your child's guaranteed freedom. Because most Indians are listed as free people of color.
Yes, they are free, but they cannot inherit native land.
And there's a couple of cases. There's one in Connecticut in the middle.
No, in New York.
In New York. There's one in Connecticut where a guy in New Milford, Connecticut argued that he deserved right of land because of Indian land right. And that was in New Milford, Connecticut. For poor whites, you're the same social class. It did not matter, that because you were landless. You were voteless, you were the same social class. Also for poor Europeans, Native women were good farm workers. They were, that they liked, that they knew the land, that they were good at farming, and that was a very good match for Native people. This increases your family. It makes your family bigger, larger matrilineal kinship. So if you hit hard times, that you can then buffer on your neighbors. Because they're your extended kinship. And also for some places, not New York, but other places, there's a Indian land right or title to land or hunting, fishing, trapping rights, which can help you, sustain yourself. But it was seen as sometimes advantageous. Also, bilingual children, multicultural children. One of the most famous multi-ethnic native person was Andrew Montour, who was Mohawk. He was, I think, Algonquian, and he was French. And his mother was Madame Montour, was one of the largest Native American landholders in the mid-18th century. in Pennsylvania. But Andrew was critical to treaties and negotiations with the British Crown and Native tribes in the 1750s. So he's a product of this, of this biracial, upbringing. And so there are hundreds, if not thousands, of European Americans or self-identified European Americans and African Americans who have American Indian ancestry, either detectable or not detectable, but that it's a far more frequent thing than we realize. Also, American Indian language is far more pervasive in the colonial world than we realize. We find plenty of primary source documents where people are writing to other Europeans and they just use Indian words for stuff, whether it's a kid or a type of food or it's an expression. And it's like, well, that's a Narragansett word and you're writing to, Mary Livingston, and it goes to show that all of these people, they understood a good chunk of different words that were in Algic, and they understood these Algic words, which shows that they had, obviously no one is fluent, very few people are fluent in these languages, but that they comprehended it enough that we might comprehend conversational Spanish, that they had a level of understanding.
Wow. Unfortunately, our time is up, and Matt's going to kick us out. So round of applause for our awesome panel, please. This has been fabulous, and you guys have given me ideas for our next year worth of programming. So apparently, I think we might have one about foodways. I feel like that'd be a good thing for you too. Thank you all again for being here. We really, really appreciate everyone coming out today. We will have our next event with Michael Dauma. Oh, wait, hold on, sorry. I forgot there's something else I have to do before I say goodbye. So one of the people who did a lot of research on this painting and is a descendant of the actual Van Bergens is a woman named Deb Bruno, and she wrote this book. And it's fabulous. It's an easy read. It's called A Hudson Valley Reckoning, Discovering the Forgotten History of Slaveholding in My Dutch American Family. I'm pretty sure that Matt has it in the library. Her name is Deborah Bruno, B-R-U-N-O. I think it's actually on the sheet that you had hand out too. Yeah, I think there's some in the back. I can also give it to you. So Deborah, unfortunately, could not be here today to talk about this painting. And the part of the thing about the book is that she is a descendant of the Van Bergen family, and she has come in contact with we'll call her cousin, who is a descendant of the enslaved family. So Deborah and her cousin gave me something to read to you on behalf of them, because this is a really important piece of their history. So Deb wrote, as you all likely know, the Van Bergen Overmantel was just one of the few early images of slavery in New York. It also signaled the beginning of the growth period for slavery in the area. As the Dutch farmers expanded their property, their mills, their crops, their products for sale, they also accumulated human property. In the 18th century, the rural area south of Albany was dotted with farms on both sides of the Hudson, farms with growing need for labor. I came across research on the Overmantel when I began writing my book. Initially, I thought it was an interesting image, nothing more than a colorful portrait of that world. Granted, the painting was even more compelling because it showed a home in Leeds, just a few miles from my own hometown of Athens. In the early stages of my research, I hadn't even put together the fact that the Van Bergen family also populates my family tree. But I figured that those tiny figures of the enslaved in white muslin didn't have names, and I assumed that I had no way of finding out who they were or how they lived. John Van Bergen, I realized, was the name of the black man who was the very first husband of Mary Vanderzee, the matriarch of her cousin Eleanor's family, and the woman whose portrait graces the cover of the book. Okay. Mary Vanderzee was Eleanor Meyer's 3 times great-grandmother. John Van Bergen's children married Vanderzee children. He was Eleanor's step-great-great-great-grandfather. He probably descended from one of the enslaved people owned by Martin or Garrett Van Bergen, or their brother Peter. In other words, my family members populated the Van Bergen Overmantel, but so did Eleanor's. Eleanor writes, in July 2022, Deborah and I, along with my sister Beverly, traveled to the Fenimore Museum in Cooperstown to view the Van Bergen Overmantel. This painting, attributed to John Heaton, was painted between 1728 and 1738, depicted our members of the Van Bergen family, Native Americans, and what could possibly be the first painted images of enslaved people that would become the United States. The Van Bergen name is an ancestral one that Deborah and I share. Seeing depictions of people who could possibly be the ancestors of both of us was emotionally overwhelming. So that is the words of some people who are the actual descendants of those. All right, now I can say the other stuff. That's going to be the next one. I'm getting there. So we will be back on October 5th at the Hudson Area Library with Michael Dauma, who wrote this book, The Slow Death of Slavery in Dutch New York. This is the book that a lot of people here have referred to. It talks a lot about wheat being the main crop here and how enslavement was affected by the amount of wheat grown here. So that will be at the Hudson Area Library. And then also in November, we will have a talk about, it's actually titled, Were There Slaves in Your Cellar? And it's with Walter Wheeler, who's an architectural historian, and he will talk about how to figure out, those of us who live in old houses, were they actually sites of enslavement or on the Underground Railroad? Okay, so, again, thank you all for being here. Work that we do, this kind of programming and the research that we do is, there's three of us. There's Vicki and my husband Pete and I, and we do all of it. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of community engagement. And so I would ask you, if you have it in you, to make a donation to the archive. You can do it through our website. I'll take your credit card right here. Don't leave money on the table. Also, if you don't already follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, please do. Please like, comment, share, tell all your friends, because this is a really, it's a labor of love for us, but it's also, we think, a really important part of the community. And you might know, in this day and age, a lot of grant money for these kinds of activities are kind of drying up. So we really appreciate the monetary and the emotional and mental support of our community. So thank you all very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, everybody. Wonderful.